Today we are going to hopefully finish moral development. Next week we are doing gender. And so let's get started from where we left off. In the second section, in the second lecture today, after the break, we will have an in-class activity where we're going to do the in-class activity together, interactively. And so as you guys all know, we started the moral development chapter. We said that there are different theories that aim to explain how morality develops. And we went over biological and psychoanalytic theories. We had just started social learning theory where we actually stopped. So I'm going to go to social learning. So this is a problem. I mean, I don't think it's a problem. I always go over my slides before class. Every time I go over them, I find something I need to change, I want to change, I think it's better if I change it. And I can't stop myself, so I change things. So I did post updated slides. One of the things that I updated was, so this is supposed to be, this slide, characteristics of good models of moral behavior, is supposed to be in social learning theory, so it should come after this slide. So what you have, if you printed it last week, what you guys have here, characteristics of good behavior, should come as slide 11. And I'm going to tell you what I've changed as I go through too. The changes are not big, by the way, but if you wanted to see the latest, and you don't have to print the whole thing either, you can just print the pages that have changed. So we were talking about how children might actually learn moral behavior through watching adult models. So it's not possible that child finds himself or herself in repeated moral dilemmas. They also learn, if they were to learn only by experience, then their understanding of morality would be very limited, congruent with their life experience. They also learn from watching others through vicarious learning. And in recent years, there's been a lot of research that actually looks at who children select or prefer to learn from. So we used to think at one point in time, way back, that children were kind of indiscriminate. If they saw an adult do a behavior and do it repeatedly, that the child would probably imitate that adult. But in recent years, in the past 10 years, there's been a surge of research that actually shows that children do select. Because if you think about it, not all adults behave in the same way either. We have seen that this research actually tells us, not maybe with morality, but in information learning, that children actually choose to learn, young children, 3-year-olds, choose to learn from familiar adults. So they, for example, put more emphasis on their mothers as compared to a stranger. Or their own teacher, they trust their own teacher more as compared to another teacher who's not their teacher. And as children get older, though, they start selecting on the base of more appropriate cues, such as, has this person been correct in the past? Is this person an expert? So by 5 years, children are more likely, for example, to trust another child, say, on something that children are supposed to be experts in. So, for example, cartoon characters, Pokemon characters, or whatever, as compared to an adult. So they start judging whether that person is an expert to be trusted. And this seems to, there's now a whole body of research that shows that there seems to be a shift from 3 to 5 years of age. And so learning theories tell us that if children see good models, then they are likely to learn from those models for issues of moral development as well. If the model is warm and responsive, have competence and power, is consistent between what he does and what he says, then children are more likely to try to imitate and learn from that model in terms of moral behavior. We talked a little bit about punishment, corporal punishment, and other types of punishment. Effectiveness of punishment is usually dependent on whether it is consistent. So if a mother or a father punishes a child only 2 out of 5 times that that misbehavior has occurred, it would be unreasonable to expect that the child would actually learn the appropriate way of acting. Warm parent-child relationship is almost a must, because the child should understand that the punishment is not taking away from the love of the parent, that they're not being loved less, but they are being taught a lesson. And that only is possible in the context of a warm parent-child relationship. And the parent should also, or the teacher, should also provide explanations for why the punishment is happening. Why was this behavior wrong? Why did it need to be punished? So the child needs to be able to see that causal relationship between punishment and misbehavior. Otherwise, there is nothing to learn. And maybe not this line of research, but research that actually looks at children's language development shows that children's understanding of causal relations, so for example, when they tell a story, whether they tell causal sequences, actually develops with age. So a 3-year-old might not be able to come up with the causal relationship by himself or herself, and might need assistance from the parent or the adult, the teacher, to actually understand why that behavior was inappropriate. Their alternatives are, so it's not only physical, corporal punishment, but also timeout, withdrawing privileges, and positive discipline techniques are important. We will talk about positive discipline here. Are there differences in how children perceive punishment, especially physical punishment, based on, and when we talk about physical punishment here, again, I said it last class, but in case you weren't here, we're not talking about bruising a child, hitting a child in the face. Usually when the literature talks about corporal punishment, they're more likely to think about spanking, right? So it's not something that hurts the child way too much. It's not hair pulling, ear pulling, hitting the face, but we're talking about mild physical pain inflicted. It is important because it's on a very delicate continuum, I think, physical punishment. It is very easy for parents to also go towards the extreme ends of that spectrum, because usually when a child's behavior requires punishment, the parent might be also extremely upset and may not be able to control themselves as they're inflicting this punishment. And so it is actually more important for adults to cool down and decidedly give punishment in ways that actually tell the child what was wrong and how to correct it, if possible. Research shows that parents resort to physical punishment in cases where the child's life is more in danger. So it's more likely when a mother and a child are crossing the road, for example. It is more likely if the child all of a sudden makes a move towards jumping in the street, it is more likely for a parent to just, at that point, yank or spank, just to make the child understand this is a no-no. There's also research that shows that, at least in the United States, for example, physical punishment is extremely common. And so it is not something that only people who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, people with less education, people who live in dangerous neighborhoods, it's not only them that practice physical punishment. It seems like physical punishment exists across all socioeconomic domains and education levels too. And it is perceived differently based on how the culture thinks about it. For example, in the US, studies that have been done with ethnic minorities, especially in this case African American children, shows that African American parents are more likely to actually engage in this kind of physical punishment. But in that culture, the physical punishment is mild. It kind of remains in the form of spanking. It's delivered in a context of parental warmth. So the child feels that the parent is punishing them because they care, they're concerned, not because out of like a sadistic desire to inflict pain. and it's aimed at helping children become more responsible adults. The meaning and the impact of physical discipline then vary sharply with the cultural context. It seems like also in this culture, the physical punishment isn't showing as much negative consequences as it is with other groups of children. It's because of how the children perceive it. I always think, if you wanted to, this is a hypothesis, and we've actually done a study to see, a senior thesis, to see if actually it holds. But we need another culture to compare it to. So for example, in Turkish culture, my observation is that a good mother is one that worries. Like, your mother is worried. Your mother is worried that you are cold. Your mother is worried that you are hungry. I see knowing smiles in people's faces. Your mother is I don't know, a center for worrying about you, right? And it doesn't really go away when you grow up either. Your mother keeps worrying about you, right? And keeps telling you things that you know, like you should sleep better, you should eat better, you should do. And I feel like it's a part of being a good parent, like in the definition, in at least, and it might be neighboring cultures too, both in the Near East, in the Middle East, even in the Balkans. A good mother then feels like they're responsible for worrying about their child. Somebody has to have this job. The worrying müdür in the house, in most Turkish households, for that reason, seems to be the mother. So I'm wondering if that kind of anxiety, because it kind of feels like an anxiety to an outsider, right? I don't think an American mother, a North American mother, actually worries whether their 24-year-old ate well last night, for example. That's kind of a crazy idea. But your mother may. Now, is this kind of anxiety maladaptive? Not necessarily so. If the culture thinks that this is what it's supposed to be, and people are playing certain roles, it could be that this anxiety isn't really deep felt in the way that anxiety that leads to clinical problems are, but it's more of a nuance of the culture's definition for that role. So, you know, this is my hypothesis. I just kind of digressed from this topic. Anyways, so positive discipline, we talked about it. We talked about it right over here as an alternative to physical punishment. These are strategies that build mutually respectful bond between the adult and the child. It is letting the child know how to act ahead of time. So putting a child in a situation that they have no idea how to behave and then expecting the correct type of behavior might be inappropriate, especially for very young children. So telling them, so if you are, for example, taking your child to, where do mothers take their children to in Turkey? A gathering with friends, for example. Mother is getting together with other girlfriends. There will be a few other children there. Say it's a restaurant. If you don't want your child to run around between the tables, then you tell your child beforehand, right? And then remind them once you get there too. But expecting that the child will actually know how to behave, because we're talking about a 4-year-old, for example, is quite unrealistic. So the positive discipline also puts responsibility on the adult in telling the child what the expectations are, right? And so this is praising mature behavior. So it's not only focused on punishing the child, but when you see something positive, you actually praise it. Use transgressions as opportunities to teach. So when the child misbehaves, use that as an opportunity to teach the child why that was wrong and how the child could have acted in the appropriate manner. Reduce opportunities for misbehavior. Yeah, so if you think you don't want your, so you, for example, made cookies. And you made these cookies for your child's class. There is a birthday tomorrow, and you're going to take these cookies to the child's school. Your child is 3 years old. And these are her or his favorite cookies. Letting them sit on the counter may not be the most, so you are putting your child in a battle with their own will. They're 3. So putting it somewhere the child can reach might actually be a better idea in this sense, depending on the child's age. For a 9-year-old, if you tell the 9-year-old you should not eat, they should understand that. For a 3-year-old, you might want to reduce the opportunity here. Provide reasons for rules. Establish family routines and duties. So do not, for example, argue about cleaning up the room every time. Make it something that happens every single day. that it's normal to do. You're not asking for a favor from the child when you ask the child to clean up their toys. When it becomes a favor, then it becomes a context of conflict. I'm telling you all this, and I'm also wondering, of those of you who live with parents, are you actually still having problems about tidying up your room, putting your dirty laundry? I'm not going to go into it, but I see knowing smiles, yes? So, and somebody who turns red really fast turned red, yes. Encourage maturity. This goes along with praising mature behavior, and also be sensitive. Be sensitive to the child's needs, child's anxiety. Your child might be, for example, misbehaving out of anxiety, right? It is important to understand that. And so this is, these are tenets of positive discipline. Where social learning theory takes a hit a little bit is these times at which, and I think unfortunately we're going through one of those times again in the whole wide world, where society starts acting strange. I don't know how else to describe this. But you know, there are wars, there are people suffering, as we witness. And then there comes these selfless individuals. Here are two examples, Jup Westerwiel and Irina Sandlerova, who actually selflessly put their lives at risk to behave in ways that they believe is moral when no model exists. So, like, you know, social learning theory kind of is about reinforcement, punishment, modeling. But what if acting in a moral way is going to be punished, not reinforced? And maybe you will have to hide your moral behavior such that nobody will know to reward you. And that you might even lose your life doing that. Why would then people exist that actually risk their lives? Jup Westerwiel actually lost his life crossing, I think, the border with Belgium, where he was trying to smuggle 60 Jewish children away from the Second World War. And Irina Sandlerova managed to smuggle out so many Jewish children that apparently outside people who issued visas for Jewish people to run away from countries in which their lives were in danger, she single-handedly has actually rescued more children than any other civil person.
Does she have a Nobel Prize?
She did get a prize. I'm not sure if she did get the Nobel Prize, but she did get several medals, honor medals. And she died at an older age, too, in her 90s. She died in the past 10 years. And so, how so then? Now we are coming to the cognitive theories, trying to explain how morality develops. And here is one of my favorite people again, right? With this one cuddly picture. And here is, actually this looks much more contemporary, Kohlberg. And so, Piaget and Kohlberg. And here, the family album of developmental psychology. So the idea, the core idea, is that we construct moral understanding while we're mentally trying to make sense of situations that involve interpersonal and social conflict, that there is a cognitive component to moral reasoning. Which also means that children's own cognitive limitations when they're young is going to be reflected in how they think about morality. It has to also to do with perspective taking, right? So we judge, morality actually depends a lot on perspective taking. In order to decide what's appropriate, we need to understand, for example, if it's hurting someone, if it's hurting the society at large, right? We need to reason about others' perspectives, whether it's an individual or a group. And considering more than one variable and perspective, we know from chapter 6, where we did cognitive development, actually shows significant developments throughout between 2 and 12 years of age, actually. So Piaget has been mostly criticized for taking a very solitary perspective on children, right? That we talked about it in chapter 6 too. He seemed to not take social context into account. And for him, it seemed like children developed through their experience with the world. They were solitary meaning makers. But in his book about morality, in the way that he thinks and talks about morality, we actually see that he takes social contexts into account. And so he used the game of marbles, bilye oynamak, as his base of exploring how morality develops. Now you might wonder why. Back in the day, of course, in Turkey and elsewhere, children were more able to go outside and play. I don't know if you ever had the chance. Did your generation play outside, like apartmanın otoparkında falan? Yes, yes. And so, and what it is groups of children come together that live in the same neighborhood, that may not actually live in the same apartment building in our current cities, and they actually play games. I remember as a child playing, for example, yakar top and one other thing, istop, yes. And you learn those games not because there is a book about them, not because your mother or father tells you about them. You learn these games when you get there. So you go down to your apartment buildings. It is so sad to say it, but otopark. That's where most games happened, at least when I was young. I don't imagine it happens anywhere else right now, where children can freely, without their parents, venture. So they go to the parking lot, and all these children are there. And also, it is not like going to school, because in school, in your classroom, everybody's of the same age. But when you go to you go to the yard, let's call it the yard, so that it sounds better. You encounter children who are older than you and who are younger than you. You might start out with being the youngest, but in time you will become the oldest. And at one point, it will no longer be cool to go to the yard and play with the children. At that point, you stop, right? And so there's an age diversity in this group. These games are not taught by adults. So what happens is that these games are passed down from one generation of children to the next generation of children. And the generations kind of go fast. So in 5 years, for example, a 5-year-old, probably they don't let a 5-year-old out these days, but a 7-year-old who was let out, by 12, it is going to be not a cool activity, go out and play, so he will graduate from this group, right? So there's a very fast progression, a fast cycling. What also happens is that the older kids in these groups teach the rules of these games to the newcomers, right? So the abis and ablas, the big sisters and big brothers, are responsible for transmitting this information. And so Piaget, being the observant person he is, actually observed marble games in Switzerland, where children actually did this. They went and they played with marbles. And so he viewed these games, of course, being who he is. He didn't see children playing marbles. He saw a whole society, a model of society. He saw transmission of rules. And he saw children's an opportunity to understand children's ability to understand rules. And so he will come up then, based on these observations, 2 levels: heteronymous morality and morality of cooperation. So he thinks that the young children, the 5 to 8-year-olds, they are bound to realism. So they have fixed views about rules. They think that rules are unchangeable. When the older brother says, this is how you play it, then that's how it's played. You don't change the rule. And they see these bigger sisters, bigger brothers as authorities. And they believe that playing a game requires strict obedience. You need to adhere to the rules. Otherwise, you don't play. And they judge wrongness, though, by outcomes, not intentions. They don't really focus on why a person did a behavior. If a behavior resulted in a negative outcome that is not desirable, then they may think that that behavior was amoral. In morality of cooperation, approximately 9 years and older, rules are perceived as socially agreed on, and they're flexible principles. Now, at this point in time, but think like the child is going into like concrete operation to formal operational stage, and they basically are able now to reason beyond reality. They are able to engage in abstract thinking, and this shows because they now think that rules can change if it's not benefiting everyone, for example. And they have a standard of ideal reciprocity. Ideal reciprocity is not tit for tat. It's not you hit me, I hit you. Ideal reciprocity is you do not do to others what you don't want done to yourself, right? If you don't, for example, want to be left out of a game, you make sure that others aren't left out either. And they judge on both outcomes and intentions. They take both into consideration. Yes. So Piaget also, of course, came out with ways to assess this, and he gave children scenarios and asked. One of these goes like this. Luke reaches to grab one of the fresh-baked cookies on the counter. His mother has previously warned him to wait until they cool down. In his haste, he knocks a glass off the counter. There should be 2 Fs, off the counter, and breaks it. Zach is helping his mother set the table. As he's helping, he accidentally knocks over a tray on which there are a dozen glasses. All of them break. Poor Zach. And Piaget is asking who is the naughtier child. And so he's deciding on, you see here it says judge wrongness by outcomes, not intentions. So Piaget's kids, through this interview, the young ones are saying, well, Zach is naughtier because he broke more glasses. So they're focusing on the outcome. Whereas as children get older, they understand that Zach isn't a naughty child, but Luke probably is. And so So while, as I said, Piaget has been strictly criticized because he didn't really pay much attention to the social domain, morality is a very good exception where he actually explicitly focuses on peer interaction and how morality develops within a social context. And this makes a lot of sense since 6 to 12-year-olds spend approximately 40% or more of their time with their peers rather than their parents. And they actually have less adult control. And so it is possible that they teach one another how to behave. And it's not that one person knows and teaches the other. They learn together through negotiation, through conflict, you know, compromise and discussion. So here, games with rules are actually very interesting, a good context to learn about children's developing sense of morality. Because in games with rules, one has to keep multiple perspectives in mind. One has a goal because you're trying to win. Games with rules usually have a winner and losers. But you are also trying to be fair. So you're trying to win fairly, right? Which is not an easy feat. In order to do this, they need to decrease their egocentrism and take multiple perspectives while keeping the rules of the game in mind. So accordingly, again, according to Piaget, in early childhood, there are little regard for rules. And this is not just Piaget saying, many researchers actually shows this. 2 to 4-year-olds don't really understand competition. I have tried this many times at preschool classrooms with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, where I have also divided them into 2 groups, you know, işte balıklar ve aslanlar. And then made a game where they had to compete against one another. They don't seem to understand when they win. They actually, you might see a child who's on one team help the other team. Because they just blurt out things, right? Like if they know something to be true, even if you're asking the other team, they might actually jump in and say it. So 2 to 4-year-olds aren't very good at competing. Yes?
I got it.
Okay. And so in middle childhood, they understand there's a sense of winning. I mean, once this understanding of winning actually starts, 5 years, 6 years, beginnings, parents complain most about how their child cannot handle losing. If you ever work at a setting, whether it be preschool, a school, wherever, whether you go into private practice, you might one day have parents who tell you that my 5-year-old cries a lot when he or she loses a game. It is expected that in these first few years, when they're trying to understand what it means to compete, they're also trying to understand what it means to win, what it means to lose, and what it implies for self, right? And so it is quite expected that they would actually have trouble at first. Yes?
No competition means no ambition or no greed.
A very good question. So does no competition mean no ambition or what?
No greed.
No greed.
Is it something we develop through life?
That can't be true, is it? Can it? Also, we saw this experiment in the last lecture. Do you remember where young children wanted to take more than their opponent? There were chips. And so instead of taking the number of chips that was more in quantity, they cared that they actually took the chips that was more than their opponents, although less in quantity. That seems like there's a comparison going. It is quite possible that they begin to compare, but now games with rules have extra cognitive challenges. When you make a game with like elaborate rules, that the chips that we watched wasn't really a game. There was nothing to do, you know what I mean? So they only chose the amount of chips that they were supposed to take. But it's possible that combined with the cognitive load of trying to stay in the game and keep the rules in mind, that younger children aren't showing clear group identity when competing against a different group. I think there are nuances is what I'm trying to. I don't think we can say there is no ambition. I think that we can say there is no greed, but it is not yet systematic, is what I would think. That'd be my best answer for this. And so, in middle childhood, they learn to win according to rules, and they are at a stage of moral realism where they think that rules cannot change. They have to be followed. If you want to play this game, you play it by these rules, and they believe in immanent justice, a belief that breaking a rule always leads to punishment. You wish, right? You wish there was immanent justice, but of course there isn't. Yes. Moral relativism starts around 8 years of age. Again, ages are very approximate. This is the understanding that rules are created by people to help them get along. And so if a rule is not serving that purpose, if it's not helping people get along, then maybe it's not a good rule and it needs to be modified. So that idea comes up. Yes. And between 9 and 11, they can change the rules if most agree. Now, a very good variation on this comes from Helwig's research. And Helwig looked at children's interpretations of events in a game context and wanted to figure out whether it's the rules that matters, whether it's the intent or the consequence. So he's actually working with these Piagetian ideas, again making the task a little bit more child-friendly. And he basically came up with the smart, stupid game. There's a version of this. There's a known version. It's Duck, Duck, Goose, I believe. So it's children sit in a circle, just like, what is that game in which our kids sit in a circle? Yes, there's a name for that game, no? Is it the Asatırım, Basatırım? You have a handkerchief, you put it, huh? Okay, I always imagined there was another name for this. Anyways, but the song is of course correct. So it's just like that, where the kid goes, touches everybody's head or back and says smart, smart. But once it says the other word, say it's duck, duck, goose, or here in this case, smart, smart, stupid, the kid will have to get up and start chasing the other kid. And so here, in this experiment, Helwig and colleagues gave these scenarios to children. And for example, one of them, Mark tapped Sally on the head and said, stupid. She was happy to get picked and chased them around the circle. So this is how the game is played. Okay, so it's not duck, duck, goose, it's smart, smart, stupid. So being called stupid doesn't mean somebody's calling you stupid. It means you are picked, right? Sally wants to be picked. She knows the game. There's no problem. Mark's happy. Sally's happy. Good. And basically, Halwig asked, is it okay or not okay that Mark called Sally stupid, right? And here you see grade 1, grade 3, grade 5. If it doesn't add up to 100, it means that it was uncodable. Not that there's a mistake, but you know, sometimes children give answers that cannot be coded, or they say, I don't know, for example. That's what it is. And you get one child who always likes to be outside the box. And so anyway, so here, what do you see? Most children at all age groups, grade 1, grade 3, grade 5, agree. So grade 1 would be around 6 to 7, 8 to 9, 10, 11, right? They all agree that there's nothing wrong here. Yes, everybody's happy. Allah memnun, Satan memnun. So let's change the situation. Paul tapped Janice on the head and said, stupid. Janice was new to school and didn't know the game. And she started to cry. Is it okay or is it not okay? Now here, first graders seem to focus on consequences more than intent here, or as much as intent. This is not significantly different. But as you see, as they grow older, the blue line, which is okay, increases, which tells us that at grade 5, they understand that Paul didn't mean to make Janice sad. He just couldn't think that Janice wouldn't know the game. All right, here we go, negative intent, negative consequences. Karen thought that John, who was new at school, probably wouldn't know the rules of the game. Then she didn't like John and wanted him to be upset. So she tapped him on the head and called him stupid. John thought she was being mean and he started to cry. So Karen knowingly did this, knowing he probably wouldn't know, right? So again, you see the confusion as we get to grade 3, grade 5. As you see, most children are telling us it's not okay, but this young group is there are still a significant number of it's okays. Okay. And here comes negative intent, positive consequences. Brian didn't like Janice and thought he could make her cry again. So the next day he tapped her on the head and said stupid. But Janice, who had since learned the rules of the game, was happy to be picked and ran after him. Is it okay? Is it not okay? So here, what do we get? First graders are saying it's okay. Why? Because the consequence is okay, right? So they kind of disregard the intent, the malicious intent of Brian, and focus on whether Janice was happy at the end or not. But as you see, as age as children get older, they show less and less positive responses. So it's telling us very nicely that their understanding, their ability to juggle intent and consequence is developing through the primary school years, right? There's a lot of development that needs to take place. So evaluation of Piaget's theory. Well, children can judge intentions earlier. That's always Piaget's problem, right? He gives these ages and it can happen earlier. Young children can center, they do more often center on consequences and interpret intentions rigidly, so he was right there. But many children show both kinds of reasoning too. It's not that young children can only be characterized by one way of thinking. In different contexts, with different scenarios, we can see, depending on children's familiarity, their involvement, we can see differences as well. And moral development processes extend longer than Piaget thought. So by 11, moral development is not complete. And Kohlberg is going to tell us this is a lifelong thing. Now, I have 10 minutes, and I'm going to give out evaluations. So, and I'm going to leave, Ejam's going to leave, we're all going to leave. Who wants to spend some calories going to the psychology office? I need a, yes. Mohammed is going to the psychology office.